Hello, ladies and gentlemen, Nick here. With the recent release of The War Doctor Begins Forged in Fire Big Finish audio box set, I thought now would be the perfect opportunity to take a look at the first four Big Finish audio box sets featuring the War Doctor, followed by a look at Forged in Fire before the next War Doctor box set, The War Doctor Begins Warmongerer, I believe that's the title, is released at the end of this year. So, I will be doing a video every month or every other month, depending on how the schedules work out and what we're doing with the Series 13 reviews later this year, between now and the end of the year. And we will take between now and the end of the year, starting off with only the Monstrous, the first box set, followed by Infernal Devices, Agents of Chaos, and Casualties of War, rounding out with the War Doctor Begins Forged in Fire before we get to the War Doctor Begins Warmongerer. As for the third and fourth War Doctor Begins box sets, we'll get to them when they come out. So we start off the series with the War Doctor Begins, Only the Monstrous, the first box set of the War Doctor's audio adventures, released at the end of 2015 and starring John Hurt as the War Doctor, co-starring Jacqueline Pearce as Cardinal Australia, as well as Lucy Briggs-Owens as Rejoice, aka the nursemaid, and Caroline Seymour as an older Rejoice, and I'll explain later, also known as the slave. We also have Veclin, played by Beth Chalmers, who'll be a main character in Warmongerer when that series comes out, as well as Nicholas Briggs as the voice of the Daleks. It's not the best series of the War Doctor stories, but it's a good start to his audios. It's not a major jump in or anything, but it is a good start to the series. The first story, The Innocent, actually kind of takes place mid-life during the War Doctor, and I think that's where these audios were going to pick up anyway. The plot of this story sees two Time Lords at Omega-1, a space station for the Time Lords, where they have to activate the Time Destructor from the Daleks' master plan in order to wipe out a Dalek fleet. The Doctor believes that they were not chosen at random as they initially thought, and decides to take their place as being the War Doctor. He doesn't mind if he dies during this war. However, the War Doctor does not die. He arrives on this planet called Keskar, where he is looked after by a woman called Rejoice, or the nursemaid as she's credited in the cast list, played by Lucy Briggs-Owens. And over the course of several days on Keskar, the Doctor is able to help them. He's able to recover, and then he's able to help the Keskans defend themselves from this fascist race known as the Talians, a bit like the Daleks basically, except humanoid. And he's able to help them out and give them a bit of technology to protect themselves for a bit longer. Meanwhile, Cardinal Australia, the head of the War Council, and played by Jacqueline Pearce, wants the Doctor back fighting the Time War, and she needs him for a particular mission this time round when a Time Lord strategist, Seraphim, goes missing behind enemy lines. So she has her best agent, Veclin, bring the Doctor back to Gallifrey. And that pretty much wraps up The Innocent. As the first story, The Innocent is a good introductory story. Not an awful lot happens once the Doctor gets to Keskar, but there's some good bits with him and the supporting characters on the planet, and we're given a good introduction to Cardinal Australia. Whilst this won't be her first chronological appearance, it is definitely the first one with the character, and she definitely makes an impression. She's a bit of she's a determined warmongering character who may be a little bit selfish or can't really see beyond her own goals or the Time Lord's own goals, and she definitely doesn't have as much heart as most other characters in the series. But Jacqueline Pearce does do a really great job in the role of Australian. That is going to be staying true throughout these four box sets, as well as probably the first 8th Doctor Time War box set that Matt covered a few years ago. This story also works really well as a standalone single adventure, as well as part 1 of a 3-part box set, which moves us into part 2, The Thousand Worlds. I think this one might be my least favourite of the 3 of this box set, because the first one was a good, nice, calm, easy introduction to the series, and then this one is kind of it's mostly build up, because this one ties in with the last one a bit more directly, and it feels more like it's building up that one. After the War Doctor gets information about Seratrix and is informed about what's going on, he goes down to he goes back to Keskar. Actually, he discovers himself back to Keskar. As the Time Lords have discovered this place called the Null Zone, which they can't get into, but the War Doctor is able to get himself in to try and find Ceratrix, and then Veclin and the two Time Lords the Doctor saved on Omega-1 follow him in there to take part in the mission to try and rescue Ceratrix. And it turns out the Null Zone includes Keskar in the future from when the Doctor left at the end of The Innocent, or rather was taken by the Time Lords at the end of The Innocent. And so sometime into the future, Battalions invade Keskar with help from the Daleks, and Keskar becomes one of 1,000, if not more, worlds that the Daleks conquer and operate. And they want to rule the Null Zone. They want to have these 1,000 or so planets, maybe more. And they are prepared to negotiate with the Time Lords peace to can have control operations of these 1,000 worlds, and they won't affect anybody else. This is more important to the next story. But when the Doctor arrives at Keskar, he's kind of just he's looking around, and investigating. He meets up with Rejoice, now played by Caroline Seymour, and bumps into the Talians, who I've got to say are not that great. I'm not a fan of the Talians. They're just big, shouty, grumpy people with deep voices, and yeah, they're not scary. You could say that about human fascists, I suppose, and it's more what they stand for, a bit more scary. But the Talians just feel more like generic thugs rather than universal conquerors like the Daleks or someone to be feared by. They're just thugs, angry thugs, and yeah, I think the Talians are the weakest part of this series because they're just thugs. It might have been better if they just weren't included in the first place. Maybe the Cassians were affected by the Daleks or something. It feels like the Talians are just thugs, and that's really it. As well as thugs who like war and conquering and stuff. It's basically if the Daleks met the Sontarans, basically. And we're going to have Sontaran story in the Time War during the third box set. More on that later. But yeah, 1,000 Worlds is a good story, but I do think the Talians are a very generic race, and it's mostly a setup story for what comes in the third adventure. However, the start and the end of the 1,000 Worlds are really good and tie in nicely to the previous and following adventures. The final story is The Heart of the Battle, and this is my personal favourite because stuff actually happens, as opposed to 1,000 Worlds where they don't really do an awful lot. Well, actually, Veclin and her team do a bit in 1,000 Worlds, but I mean, still plot-wise, this time around the Doctor is he doesn't really want to help Ceratrix have peace with the Daleks because he doesn't think it's possible. Any other Doctor would probably try to make peace, but considering that it's the Daleks that the Time Lords are trying to make peace with, he doesn't think it will happen. He's right technically. It turns out he's right, but he does try and keep his Time Lord friends alive, and Rejoice, of course, and they're trying to get them away from the Daleks, as well as to find out what the Daleks are really up to. And eventually, the Doctor and his team are able to find out what the Daleks are up to. Ceratrix still believes they could make peace, but he's proven wrong, and the Doctor has to try and find a way to stop the Daleks. The plan the Daleks have throughout these second and third stories is to have these big drill things, as we can see on the cover of the box set, to drill into each of the 1,000 Worlds and then dig out the core or something, and then pilot the planets around like spaceships, a bit like their plan from the Dalek invasion of Earth. And they want to use these as weapons to bombard Gallifrey with and have victory of the Time War. So the Daleks are having a very complicated plan to win the Time War, but then again, it's the Daleks. But this is definitely their end goal. They want to drill the planets out, fly them around, and throw them at Gallifrey. And that's what the Daleks were planning all along. Italians aren't so keen on this idea, so they allow the Doctor to stop the Dalek plan, which he does so by destroying the mining ships, or at least the one for Keskar. And although he does consider himself a monster for doing this, because there was a couple people inside that were forced by the Daleks to be inside the drill when it was drilling into the core, He might have done this on the other Thousand Worlds as well, but I'm not entirely sure. The Italians do then attempt to kill the Time Lords. 3 of the Time Lords do die over the course of this story and the previous story, but the Doctor and Veclin escape, and Rejoice is shot, but we don't know whether she survived or not. It's left ambiguous at the end. Even Cardinal Australia doesn't know, and she's the one who rescued the Doctor and Veclin, and then the Time Lords invade the Null Zone and destroy the Daleks and the Italians, and then in the future, Keska becomes a safe haven again, with Rejoice having a statue. And it turns out this was all Cardinal Australia's plan all along. Ceratrix was some guy who was trying to make peace with the Daleks. Australia didn't think that was a good idea, so she tried to have 2 Time Lords from Omega 1, as they were part of Ceratrix's group. She tried to have them killed, die at Omega 1 as some sort of sacrifice, while Ceratrix was sent into the Null Zone. Australia would then send the Doctor into the Null Zone, and then have him bring back Ceratrix, and failing that, stop the Daleks' plan down there, and then she would send the Time Lord army into destroying the Daleks and stopping their plan. And if the Doctor hadn't been there to help, things would have gone a bit more messier, basically. Yeah, again, a bit of a complicated plan on the Time Lord's part, and it's more or less a 3-stage plan. And the same could be said for the next box set. It's building up to the conclusion of this plan, and it takes 3 stories to get there. But yeah, these 3 stories are a good introduction to the War Doctor box set. The Innocent, as I mentioned, is a pretty good, easy start to the series. Thousand Worlds is kind of just the middle story. It's tying in from the end of the first one and mostly setting up the third. And Heart of the Battle is a pretty great final story. Scoring each story, I would give The Innocent an 8 out of 10. As mentioned, it's a pretty great introduction to the series. I would also give The Thousand Worlds an 8 out of 10 as well, even though I think it is mainly setup. And The Heart of the Battle would get a 9 out of 10. This is a really great climax to the series. Overall, this box set scores of stories would be 25 out of 30, which would come to about 8 1/3 out of 10. So I will be giving the War Doctor, Only the Monstrous, an 8 out of 10. A very good start to the War Doctor series and a great introduction. The Innocent, as mentioned a few times, is a good, easy start. And The Heart of the Battle is a great climax. Thousand Worlds is also pretty good as well, even if I do think it's the weakest. Ranking them, as you probably guessed, I would put The Thousand Worlds 3 at 3rd place, The Innocent at 2nd, and The Heart of the Battle at 1st. And that's it from my review / look at the War Doctor, Only the Monstrous, the first Big Finish War Doctor box set. Next time we'll be taking a look at the second box set in the series, Infernal Devices, which might be my least favourite box set of the lot so far. Until then, thank you for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.